Well, a really warm welcome to everybody and a happy International Dylan Thomas Day to you all, wherever you may be. I know there's some in the States and some in Canada, some in Bournemouth, and some here as well. And it's great to see you wherever you are. And International Dylan Thomas Day happens on this particular date because it was in May the 14th, 1953, that Under Milk Wood was first performed, and the man himself was involved. And it's been marked for the last 8 or 9 years. And this year, there's a double celebration because it was 70 years ago to today that event actually took place. So we're marking the day and we're marking 70 years since it happened as well. And that's really exciting in the place where Dylan was born. He was born in the bedroom above us here, for those of us who are in this room. He was born up there and he lived here for 23 years of his life and started early notes towards Under Milk Wood while he was still living here in this house, although he didn't, as I've said, see the actual light of day in the form that we are familiar with until 1953. In that time, it's had loads and loads of different interpretations in different ways. And it was really exciting to hear during the last few days that there's been a remastering on vinyl of Stan Tracy's famous adaptation of Under Milk Wood in jazz. That came out decades ago, and it's been remastered and re-released this week. And that is really exciting. And it is actually an album that has been held within the jazz world, which I'm not an aficionado in, but as being one that is a seminal contribution, and it's based on Dylan's work. And we're going to look tonight at 2 different interpretations of Under Milk Wood. We're going to have a chat later with Cerys Matthews, who's just reworked Under Milk Wood Children. But before we do that, we're going to have a chat with these 2 gentlemen to my right, who are involved with a really early interpretation of a visual interpretation of Under Milk Wood by producing an animated feature film. And I'm not going to speak on your behalf. You can tell us yourselves who you are and what you did. So if we start with you, give us your name and what your role in Under Milk Wood, the animated feature film, was.
Well, my name is Robin Lyons. I was the producer, so I was in charge of the whole film, I suppose, from beginning to end.
I'm Andrew Ofilier. I did the early development on the film, and I cut the text, so you can blame me if there's something you don't like.
We shall hear more of that later, I'm sure. Yeah, absolutely. Well, there we go. That's you. But you were tasked with dealing with a really worldwide, well-known text. Firstly, before we realise how you did that, how did that come about?
Well, I'd like to say it was my idea, but it wasn't. There was a producer at BBC Pebble Mill called John King, who was a huge fan of Dylan Thomas and of the Richard Burton recording, and he desperately wanted to make an animated film of it. But BBC Birmingham, you wouldn't have. I think the film cost £800,000 or something,
Right.
which at that time was a lot more than it is, worth now. Now it probably get £2 million or something.
Yeah.
But he couldn't find the money in the BBC, so he came to S4C, the Welsh channel, and spoke to Chris Grace. And Chris Grace said, "Yeah, okay, I'll find the money." And so Chris Grace came up with some money. John King managed to get a bit of money. We we made a Welsh language version that BBC did here in Wales, and Sally Burton, Richard Burton's widow, also came in with a bit of cash because she wanted to preserve his legacy. And so S4C, in those days, we were really the only option for S4C. We were the only people who were capable of making a feature film. But until then, we'd made Super Ted, Will Quack Quack, Sean Bowman Cork, all these kind of Welsh
Early successes.
Well, they were successes, definitely, but we'd never made anything longer than half an hour, certainly, and we'd never made anything for grown-ups. So, of course, we were thought, great, this is a great opportunity for us. We can really, get our teeth into something. And we were asked to sort of take on board in our team Professor Walter Davis, who who is like the Dylan Thomas expert. So we used to have creative meetings every few weeks, probably. And Walter used to come in and tell Andrew and put stuff back in. I didn't think. He had a very disconcerting way of launching into poetry in the middle of a conversation. But apart from that, he was extremely supportive and very helpful. And so was Sally Burton, to be fair to her. She couldn't have been more supportive. So what we started by sending our designer. Our designer was a guy called Chris Glynn, who just given up being a music teacher. And was it the first thing he designed for us? I think it was. For some reason, we must have seen his work, and we said, "Will you design this for us?" And he went round Wales and for about 3 or 4 days with the director Les Orton, kind of taking photographs of different places and just the fronts of buildings, views of. I think it's probably based kind of vaguely on Aberavon, the kind of the master shot, if you like, but kind of lintels and all sorts of things they took photographs of for reference for the artists. And we chose. I wanted to have a sort of Welsh feel to the music as well, so I chose a composer called Trevor Herbert, who was a trombonist, and he was a lecturer at the Open University, but he was also he was an expert in Welsh brass bands. So I said to Trevor, we want music that kind of sounds a bit like a brass band, and we want the Melbourne Choir in there at some point. And Trevor said, well, you can't use a brass band, you have to use professional players. You can't, brass band will never be able to play what I'm going to write. And so we got the Welsh Brass Consort to record the music, and we got the Treorchi to be the male voice choir. And we recorded the choir here in Swansea in the BBC studio where Dylan Thomas did a lot of his recordings.
Yes, yeah.
And there were, I don't know 30, how big the choir is, maybe 30 guys, and there possibly even more. And they'd been taught to rise onto the balls of their feet like this when they went for the high notes. But so what happened was, when they did this, you could hear every key and every point sort of changing around. And there was no way, he said, please don't do that. There's no way they could not do it, because it was sort of ingrained in them. That's the way they've been trained. That's why they always did stuff. And then we emptied out all their pockets. and then we did it again, but we realized that the floorboards creaked. And so we, in the end, we recorded them note by note.
Wow.
And then edited it all together digitally. And because it was just hummed, you'll see in the film, there's no words to this. There's a beautiful hymn Trevor wrote. There's no words to it, it's just hummed. And so we got away with that.
Yeah. There's so many things there I want to land on, but
Yeah.
I'll go back to the Walford Davis
Yeah.
that thing maybe and bring you in on that, Andrew, because Robin referred to that. You're dealing with a text that's really well known, but also that's been really well studied by academics like Walford Davis, and people have a sense of ownership on Under Milkwood to this day, but maybe even stronger in those days. I don't know. So how do you carefully go about putting your hands on a text that people have a very definite, clear view on, like obviously Walford Davis did?
Yeah. But we knew we had this 50-minute slot.
Yeah.
So it had to be 50 minutes. So what I did was some things are very obviously visual that you can't get rid of. So, you know, Captain Cat and his kind of dreams, it's incredibly visual. You've got to have that in there. Other things like the Cherry Owens, Hessie Bighead, and things, they're not as visual. So I took those out. But some things I took out, like Jack Black, Wolf said, put it back in again. So you just
So
had
that
to-
was because it was.
yeah, he wanted that because it was actually based on an actual person. Jack Black, he was very keen that that person would be in there, you know. So we just kind of went through it. We sort of, well, I went through it, kind of cutting things that I didn't think were visual.
Which makes sense because that's your medium, so that's what guides you.
Yeah. And the other thing was, you also got to remember that it was going out before the watershed. So there were certain things that I thought, I'm not sure, you know, about them. And we did, there's some polygata in there, but I've cut some other stuff out. So there's not all the polygata stuff, there's some stuff in there. And also the thing about the Cherry Owens, I was just wondering about the time slot because, you know, they're kind of laughing and joking about how blind drunk he was and everything. I'm thinking, it was going to sort of 7 o'clock. Family was watching it. I wasn't sure about. In there really.
That's interesting because Dylan writing the work wouldn't have those considerations.
No. And I think that aren't they kind of really like Dylan Thomas and his wife? That kind of relationship, I think.
That's a whole different film.
Yeah. so you have to cut things, but obviously some people are going to be unhappy, aren't they, about it because it's their favourite part, you know.
There were also we cut out all the music for rights reasons. So all the songs we cut because I don't know how many there.
Just quite a few.
But because it was just a nightmare clearing rights. I think I've told you before about the problem we had with that. When someone at S4C went through and cleared the rights to everybody on the recording. So it was ringing people, not knowing whether the actor was still alive or not. No, sometimes they weren't. And clearing these rights. And then we invited all the surviving cast to the opening night. And they all watched the film, and I was very anxious to know afterwards what they thought. So I said, what do you think about it? Great film, but it wasn't my voice. And then we realized that actually there were 2 recordings. Richard Burton made 2 recordings of Under Milkwood with the BBC, and Don King had given us the wrong details of which one. He'd given us 1 recording, but the cast list for the other recording. So we had to go around this and clear all the rights again with a totally different, not totally different. Of course, because Richard Burton was the main lead. Some of the people were the same. So that's why that was quite an easy cut the songs.
Yeah. So what about where both of you were at that time when you had that call to deal with this work? What was your awareness of Dylan and of Under Milkwood?
Well, I'm a Welshman, so you know, from I wouldn't say I knew the play well, but I knew it. I mean, I'd heard I've heard the recording before, I think, and I'd seen the film, the live action film. So you know, it was. I was quite familiar with it, I suppose, without being an expert in any way.
And I hate to use the word, but a fan or an admirer of Alan's work, or just aware?
No, a fan.
Oh,
A fan, definitely.
yeah. And yourself?
I knew of it. I hadn't heard the recording before. But I'm not a Welshman, as you can tell.
No.
I think what's really interesting about it is, you know, in our business, you read a lot of play scripts and film scripts, and I always think they're really hard to read. There's something about them that's very hard. Not Millward though.
Oh well.
You can read that, and it's really enjoyable reading it as you would like a novel or a short story, and that's unusual in a play script.
And there weren't any references in that because it is so actually very Welsh that you found not difficult to understand. I don't mean that, but weren't relevant to you.
Well, Walford had kind of helped.
All right.
With, you know, just tell us, oh, this means this thing, or they kind of. It's interesting because I was kind of rereading it to remember what I cut like 30 years ago, and his footnotes, they're amazing because
They're worth something as well as the artwork. His footnotes, I thought. Yeah.
They're really kind of interesting things that I didn't realise at the time. You know, things that referenced other Welsh writers like Arthur Macken, but I didn't really know about those things when I was
From Killian.
Yeah. So you just kind of help us, don't you? Just
It was great. It was really
he was so
good.
enthusiastic.
Oh yeah. He's there. Yeah. So okay, you had the call, and that's where you come to the work from yourselves. So how would you go about actually turning it into a 50-minute feature film?
Right. I've got my visual age, but we'll see how we go with these. But you can always have a look.
Yeah.
Later on. Okay.
Because animation is a completely different world to what we think we know about television programs or feature films. So animation is a different ballgame.
Yeah, because
Not for you.
no, because nothing exists. You know, I don't know. Will you be able to see this? I don't know how well you'll be able to see this, but Chris was a designer, would design all the characters, and just had a lovely kind of style. This is Willie Nilly, the person. So everybody would have a drawing like this, and somewhere in courses.
Do we need, just wondering whether we need to make sure that our virtual friends can see that as well. Should we show that willy-nilly one?
Yeah, I haven't got that one yet.
No, I'll pass that on. Can I show that willy-nilly one to Jack? And oh, there we are. It's even better. Don't want anybody to miss out.
No.
Thanks, Mark.
This is a bit where you can just hang into cocoa. So there's some little colour sketches like that. But then the next step is to draw the whole film as a storyboard. And then you probably know the storyboard is like a gigantic comic strip of everything, all the scenes.
Every scene for 50 minutes.
Yeah,
Every shot.
every shot. Not every, so you know,
Wow.
in a scene there might be 10 shots or something. But and also if there's a big movement in that shot, you also need another drawing. So this is just a little bit of the storyboard. So every shot's got a little picture like this. We have 2 storyboards.
Take that out. I'll pass that on as well. So it literally is.
This is kind of this small.
Is it actually frame by frame?
Thanks.
No,
No.
the storyboard will show you every single shot.
A little bit.
And if it's not clear from one image, then you draw 2 or 3 images to
Yeah.
show how the camera does move. the artwork moves.
The artwork
Because
moves.
everything is shot on the Rostrum camera, and you move the artwork.
And that's a fixed camera looking down.
Yeah, so a camera on a big hydraulic trolley and a table. And the camera moves up and down this hydraulic trolley, does close-ups. or whatever.
And then you put the, well, you explain that. It's all big.
About it. No. So then, because lots of animators, lots of different people, everybody draws slightly different. So you have to have model sheets of everybody that shows you the formula for drawing that person, everybody in it.
How many people would be drawing?
I would have thought there might be at least 50 animators.
Wow.
Yeah.
This is Organ Morgan, and this is his model sheet. We call these turnarounds, just the turnaround to show him from different angles. And also, there would be facial shots to show him what kind of expressions it might be when he's playing the organ. So these are done by the director. Yes.
So the director has a hands-on role in the drawing as well as the animators.
Yeah, it's not always.
Not always, but in this case, yes.
In this case, because he
He's
was a very good
animator.
draftsman. He's very good draftsman. And then this is how he would look when he's painted onto the acetate. So I'll explain about that in a minute. But so each of those little scenes, so they would fill rooms. You know, there'd be like 3 rooms with all the.
Must be. Whoa.
Each one needs to be drawn up to size in the layout. This is a background layout. That goes to the background painter. And
There's a background painter involved now as well.
there's a number of them. Yeah. And then the character layout, that goes to the animator, so he knows what size to draw.
And what?
I think I'm with you. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's an incredible process.
Now, it's clear on this one because you can see
That's the layout.
there's the background layout, and that's how it looks painted up with some arms.
Okay, we'll take those two and we'll get people around the world to catch up with us. And hopefully you can put them back in order later. That will be good.
I've got the crafting cat as well, which you mentioned.
Yeah,
That's the background.
I'm just going to skip that one.
So the background there that we're showing, at the moment is made by,
A layout. art.
Well, you see, you can't take it. So there is the background. This bit is the background, and then the animator has drawn this, and it's been
That's
painted.
not to trend.
no, I won't pause it. Okay, so that's the background we've just seen, yeah?
Yeah,
And then that's been
the animation.
animated on top of it.
And I'm sure you know the reason for that is so you don't have to draw the background 12
Every
times a
time.
second.
Yeah. But you have to draw the foreground different every time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But in those days, we had it in between us.
Yeah. I'll explain that.
Okay.
So we've got in between us. Isn't that the title of a series on telly?
Now, everything has to be painted onto the acetate, but you paint it on the back. So that, and the reason you do that is that when you turn it over, you can't see any brush marks. Okay, so that's the back of one.
But you paint
On the back
On
of
the back of
the acetate. And then that's how it looks when you turn it over.
amazing.
The thing is, you can't paint like you would paint a wall or a painting or something. The paint is very kind of viscous, and what you have to do, you have to kind of push it up to the line with your brush, because you can't paint it relax. It's got to be totally flat, you know.
Yes, of course.
It's a bit of a kind of
It's not an oil painting, is it?
yeah.
You can see the.
If you get it wrong, then
So that's the back of the painting. Into painting. Back of the. And then that's what comes out of the front.
So this is Captain Cat group. And you can see that what you also have to do is, if there's lighting effects, you have to paint a different shadow color. you know, the shadow on the back of the head or in the side of the eye sockets. So all the lighting effects, you have to paint those as well.
So, okay, we've been already established there's a lot of people involved.
Yeah, yeah.
In terms of time, what does that mean? How long does it take? It's a 50-minute, which, as you say, it was a new.
We made it within a year, didn't we?
It was about 10 months altogether in the beginning. But there might be at least 50 people working with it.
50.
Right.
Yeah.
And this one, actually,
Because you would have storyboard artists, layout artists, background artists, and then different types of animators,
you need to tell this
and then
one.
painters.
This book,
I can't pass that.
no,
I can pass that one
All
on
of these-
as one more.
all of the
That's fine.
characters, it's like painting by numbers. They had a room with tiny pots of paint of all different colours, shelves, and then each one's got a number, so you know that this ghost is this blue, and he's got a number.
So that's another person, the colour.
It's all a mixer.
Colour mixer.
So
Another one.
these are all the kind of shirt is 403, and so you need that because otherwise, you know.
With so many different frames, it could be different shades.
You're gonna, why are Captain Cat's whiskers green? No, I did it wrong. Then you have to, what you have to do is you sharpen the wooden part of your brush and you scrape it off what you've done wrong and then paint it again.
But that, in terms of the work and the creative input, it's 10 months to create a 50-minute film.
And quick.
And that's a good turnaround, yeah?
Yeah.
Is that's probably because of the deadlines and
Yeah, probably.
I'd imagine.
But maybe
We were young and the best press at that time.
And you said, of course we didn't do it.
Yeah, then I'm going about the animators now. Is that okay?
I,
Okay,
that's right.
this bit is, there's different sorts of animators. There are key animators, and they're the key or extreme positions. So, for instance, if someone was being punched in a club fight, the key animator would do this drawing and that drawing. And the in-betweeners, the young ones, they would do all the drawings.
But you also have the cleanup.
Yeah. Sometimes the animators would work roughly, because you get, when you work roughly and draw a rough drawing, it has a lot of energy to it. But then you get this person who's a really good draftsman to go and clean the line up. When you just go over it and clean, so the line is really nice and clean. Because you can't have a rough line because it'll, I don't know if you've ever seen things, but you call it boiling, and the line kind of does it.
That's my phone.
Because have you ever seen Snowman? The Snowman.
Yeah.
You notice how the shade of it sort of wiggles a bit. It's called
Oh.
boiling.
But I will next time.
Yeah. And that's when you clean things. I mean, it's deliberately so in that.
Yeah, all right, yeah.
Well, this is
Right.
but because there's no depth of field in a painting, if you want something out of focus, you have to paint it blurred. So what you would do is, if you look at your finger, focus on your finger, and the background goes blurred, and then you look at the background and your finger goes blurred. If you wanted to do that effect, you would have to do two separate pieces of artwork, and then you would dissolve over 4 frames between the two, so it seemed like the focus had come into focus. It's interesting that quite a bit because there is no focus. You can't focus, because there isn't any depth in the picture.
Yeah.
This is the
That image there that you had,
yeah.
that's the cover of the Welsh language translation of Under Milkwood.
Right. This is the promotional brochure we did. This is one of the, and you'll notice it. You've probably seen some paintings around here, but some of them are very, very big. And the reason is because if I want to start in this house and pull the camera back so I'll see all of the town, I need a massive piece of artwork, because the camera's going to go at this pull them and gradually pull back from.
Yeah, there's one upstairs at the moment that you've kindly given us that goes across the whole of the fireplace.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't that one of the rabbits?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But have a look at the rabbit one, because that's another sort of thing where, once again, because there's no depth, there's rabbits in the foreground that are hung up,
Yeah.
and they're on a separate piece of cardboard. And that's because when you move across the room, you move that foreground thing quicker than the background. So you have like parallax. You know, like when you're on a train, the telegraph poles go past really fast, but the hill in the distance doesn't go.
It stays the same. Yeah.
Parallax. You have to fake it in animation.
So on the rostrum camera, you have the camera at the top of this column, and then you have this table, and the table has little levers on it, and you put different pieces of artwork on different rails, and then the cameraman will expose 2 frames normally, and then make adjustments to each level.
2 frames.
Yeah, and then he'll take the artwork off, put the new artwork on, move the backgrounds if that's necessary, take another 2 frames, and so on. So but the camera can't. The camera can just go up and down, and the table can just go side to side or can swivel. But that's about as much as you've got.
I mean, people, if you had lots of money like Disney, I mean, if you've seen Bambi or Pinocchio, but they would have a rostrum that had glass shelves with spaces in between. So if I was going to look down into the forest, I would move the camera down the column frame by frame, and I'd pull that tree out, then I'd pull this tree out, and it'd move down through all the shelves. So there's real depth, you know. It's a lot of money.
This is obviously people don't do this anymore. You know, this in the digital world, all the painting certainly would be done digitally, and you can, and probably if you wanted to do a kind of camera movement that does what you just described, you would probably make the background in CG, in computer graphics, and then give it a 2D finish to match it. When people don't draw on paper anymore; they draw onto.
So that doesn't happen.
This doesn't happen anymore, unfortunately. You know, there's things, and people stop drawing. The sad thing is people. But we made a series of Sally Manny in lockdown. And everyone did draw, actually. We insisted that everyone drew, even if it was onto a tablet. But a lot of people doing 2D nowadays will do it almost as a cutout exercise.
Yeah.
So you're moving things around rather than drawing. And it just isn't as good.
It isn't the same, because if you look at movement, everything moves in like arcs, and that's easier to do in drawing than it is if you've got a kind of sort of digital cutout that's pivoted here. You know what I mean? It doesn't move the same way.
It's a digital movement.
You can kind of tell how it's not quite how it should be. And then the final bit, this is Lloyd did this. We were trying to get an idea of what Captain Cat's thoughts would be like. So we thought, well, if we have his memories, or when he's listening to the children, the kind of using pastels, they kind of loom out of the darkness, his blindness, and then disappear again. You know, but this is really difficult to do because it's on black paper. You can't see the drawing underneath. So what you have to do is you have to keep flicking the two things to see that you're going in the right place. And you animate straight ahead. So you start on number 1 and go to number 96 or whatever, but you don't really know where you're going. You're just kind of like, hoping it's going to be okay. But he was a great animator.
That was a particularly good animated bit on his own.
Yeah. Oh yeah, you can't in between it like you do the other stuff. Because how could you give that to someone else and you can't see through it? You just got to put it
You could do it yourself. You could don't know what the next step is. Yeah, absolutely.
You can see some.
Yeah.
Someone's there.
Yeah.
So there's no painting involved in it, it's all,
It's
all pastel.
just past the yes.
That's pastel work.
Yeah,
So what was the other work was paint,
yeah.
and this is pastel.
Yeah, so this is just, you could only do this in one layer, really, one level.
Yeah. Yeah, the other stuff is you draw it on paper, and then we had these Xerox machines, photocopiers. There were special ones where you could put the drawing in and it would photocopy it onto the clear plastic. But it took a lot of getting right, didn't it? Because the first one we had, photocopies are hot. And so it would
Well,
like a
nowadays, we're talking about 1990, whatever.
Yeah, so it would all come out, pretty good chip. So you had to go and cool it down, and like a fan system.
Yeah.
And before, when we started, people had to trace it.
Oh yeah,
There's no question of doing photocopying the drawings. They had to be traced onto the cell.
Well, some of
So there's another element of work again, the tracers.
Yeah.
so, some of them are wood is hand traced, but brushed with a brush, dipped in ink, because some of the cells are so big you couldn't put them in a photocopy. So some things, especially the sequence with Organ Morgan, they were very, very big scenes, so actually hand traced.
So fascinating. You go through that 10 months of work. So when was the film shown and where?
It was premiered the sort of animation festival.
Yeah, the British Animation Festival. Was it?
So David's Hall.
St David's Hall. Yeah.
And when was that?
1991 or two? 92. So long ago.
Yeah.
It's all a blur.
Yeah, indeed. But the British Festival happened to be in Cardiff.
At that time it was in Cardiff. It was a period of 3 festivals when it was in Cardiff, and then the whole thing fell apart actually.
Yeah.
I don't think it was because of that. But
Yeah. That's not
we
cause and effect.
we opened the festival with this film, and it went down well. Some animators thought we weren't being too literal in some places, but we had a great review from
Ian Wilson.
Yeah, Ian Wilson gave us a great review. Well, then it went on the BBC, BBC Two, I think, at sort of early evening. And then we tried to, and then they also did a Welsh language version. But we tried to sort of, and it was released on DVD or maybe even VHS at that point in America and here. But when we tried to get some foreign sales with it, and it was shown in Annecy, wasn't it? And this French producer friend of mine arranged for a French actor called Pierre Arditi, who at the time was like as big as Richard Burton, certainly in France, to record the Richard Burton part in French with an excellent French translation. I can't remember. You might know who it was by, but it was a brilliant kind of poetic translation. And we, in order to translate it to France, we put this on with all the other English voices, and we showed it a few times in festivals in France, and the response was terrific. But people wouldn't. It was just too expensive to dub for people.
Right, okay. Yeah.
And so we didn't really sell it. We must have sold it to English-speaking territories, but not to anywhere where they would need to dub it, which was a real shame.
Yeah. It's intriguing because it's such obviously a visual interpretation. The work is so visually intensive, but yet Dylan described it as a play for voices. I mean, what was the challenge in adapting and doing all the work that you've wonderfully explained so far of bringing that play for voices visually?
Well, some people didn't want us to do it. There was a certain amount of resistance to it, but we didn't even we thought, we were sort of given a task and we thought, wow, this is great, we can
Yeah.
have a go at it. But we didn't even, obviously, our existence is about finding visual ways of storytelling. Everything we do is about visual storytelling. So we just approach this from that point of view. How can we make this as visual as possible? How do it without kind of disrespecting the work,
The original.
We don't want to, we didn't want to sort of do anything that would detract from that wonderful voice recording.
I suppose the other side of that is that there was plenty in the original text that was visual for you.
Exactly. But I mean, I remember things like when Morgan's having dinner with his wife and she's saying, with you it's Organ all the time. There's the table kind of lengthens and you see him actually at the end of the table is a keyboard. So so there was things that we could do, that kind of illustrated the thing in an animation way, if you like.
So like the physical distance is like the emotional distance.
Yeah, exactly.
Well,
But there are other places where maybe we were too literal with it. But I don't know, when you see Butcher Vine and this, you just get a feeling from all those dead animals hanging in the front of the screen that it just sets a mood.
Yeah.
So even when you couldn't do clever things with the like making a keyboard at the end of this table, you could create a feeling, an atmosphere to enhance the track. We wouldn't want to kind of detract from it in any way. Because it's such a good
and it's not a work, not Dylan's, because we're celebrating 70 years of Dylan and 30 years of yours. It's not a work that's aged. It's still relevant.
Yeah.
As we shall see later on.
Well,
when we see that, Well, that's fab. Thank you so much, both of you. That was really enlightening, and you could hear the responses from here. Just in case anybody has a question, if you do have something that you want to ask on the basis of what you've just heard, before we move on to the next step, this is your chance.
Yeah, perhaps I could. Where did you get the animators from? Who was the lead animator?
Well, we'd kind of trained them, right? We'd been making films 10 years before that. So we trained a lot of young people. On Super Ted, almost everybody was like in their 20s, weren't they?
Well, when we started in 1981 doing Super Ted, and Andrew was one of our first employees. Who did storyboards, and at that point, a studio, John Hallis, who was the producer of the animated Animal Farm, he had a studio in Stroud, and a studio in London, and the studio in Stroud had collapsed, fallen apart. So we picked up 3 or 4 really good top animators from there, and they came to work with us in Cardiff, and then we picked up people. We used them really to train graduates, mainly from Newport, where Andrew went, which had a kind of half decent animation course, and we also used that was, and then we had between starting Under Milk Wood and starting. And so Super Ted was maybe 8-9 years, and which we worked. We had there was continuous work in the studio at that point. So people who we trained up as graduates in 1980 and 81 were full animators in 1990. That doesn't mean to say we didn't use some freelancers, because we did, and we've been working with a French company on other projects, and there was a layout artist, Awel Kawasaki of Breton. His father used to publish books in different Celtic languages, actually. And we got him to do a lot of the layouts because he was very, very good, you know. So there were odd people who came up from London and did something.
Well, it's true to say that one of the early successes of S4C, which Superted outside of Wales and internationally, was due to animation and through people like you two.
Mm.
So
I mean, you did establish the industry, very much so.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I would like to think so. I mean, at that point, S4C had money to spend, you know.
Yeah.
They
In
unfortunately,
the early days.
unfortunately, they don't spend very much money on animation anymore. But I think without that, we kind of used that foundation that S4C gave us to kind of move on, do loads of other stuff. And in fact, Undermilk Wood was, after Undermilk Wood, we didn't work for S4C for 10 years.
Yeah.
We were doing international other stuff.
Yeah. Okay, we'll move on. We've heard eloquently and at length about the way that Dylan Thomas's work kind of resonates with these two gentlemen who are artists. Now, Dylan Thomas's work has also resonated over the decades with people who are musicians and songwriters. Mentioned Stan Tracy early on, and there are other people. He was actually in conversation with Stravinsky before he died in order to collaborate on the project. If only that was able to happen, what fascinating that would be. And Cerys Matthews, I said we'd hear from her. Cerys Matthews has done many things as a singer-songwriter in interpretation of Dylan's work, but she's gone more into the writing side with her latest project, which is her version of Undermilk Wood, kind of an adaptation, and it's for children, and it's fascinating. It was fascinating earlier on this week to have a chat with her about what she did, how she did it, and why she did it. So we can all enjoy the next 10, 15 minutes, 50 minutes or so to hear Cerys explain her response to the same work that we've just heard from Andrew and Robin. And let's enjoy a different interpretation on the same piece of work.
Well, Cerys, happy International Dylan Thomas Day to you.
And to yourself as well.
Thank you, diolch yn fawr. We've got a specific work of yours that we want to talk about, but before we get there, let's keep the suspense going a bit more first. What about you and Dylan Thomas? Where did you first come across him? Where did he enter your life?
It's a little complicated because an uncle of mine, Colin Edwards, was actually quite involved in the whole story of Dylan Thomas post Dylan's death, because he had noticed that because of all the hoo-ha surrounding his death and the headlines and the, you know, questions over his morals and the womanizing and the drinking and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
You know, he became this cartoon figure. And then once he died, my uncle got the feeling that people were kind of turning their backs to him and not really respecting the work so much because the headlines got in the way. So this would have been late 50s, early 60s, that he then set out to interview all of the people he could find still alive about Dylan to try and get behind the headlines. So he amassed this incredibly precious archive of interviews with Florence, his mum, with the children, with Caitlin, with everybody, his friends, people that had worked with him, just to get a fuller, more 360 idea of who Dylan, the man, was before too much time elapsed after his death. So I was aware of Dylan Thomas growing up through my uncle coming to visit and talking about him. And you'd think that I'd be completely versed in his work from an early age, but I wasn't. Even though I spent 10 years growing up, not a stone's throw from where Dylan grew up. I grew up behind Dick Barton's chip shop.
All right.
Which everybody that knows the area will know. It's right on the front there, where you see that crescent-shaped bay that he talks about, especially in something like A Child's Christmas. And that was his view as well when he got out, because he lived on the hill, this crescent shape. But I didn't really get into Dylan Thomas until I was in my late 20s, early 30s, if I'm honest, because despite growing up so close to where he was from, we never studied Dylan Thomas at school.
Yeah, that's quite common, that Dylan has not been regularly on school curriculums.
And it's even more surprising because I've been working with Under Milkwood so closely, and somebody like my husband who grew up in Luton, and so many people that I've met that are, London based from all over the country, it seemed more common that the English people would have studied Under Milkwood than the South Walians.
Yes,
Yeah. You studied this at school, because they knew it. They would be like quoting it back to me, and I'm like, I couldn't believe it.
When you eventually did come to Dylan yourself, as it were, how much did your uncle's work influence your view of the Dylan you then discovered?
Quite substantially, actually, because I'd always been brought up to ask questions, to read, to get context, to get different points of view. That's just the way, I'm so glad to say that I was brought up. My dad was always saying, ask questions. Do you have to say that? Do you know that's a fact? Or, what have you got to back that kind of thing up? So, I was never, and I still am never, that interested in all of the hoo-ha of people's private lives and, whatever the people that claim to be journalists put into headlines, because it's usually just for clickbait. It's for ratings, especially these days. So that didn't colour my opinion. All I really am concerned with, and this goes generally anyway, with music, art, literature, anything, is, does this talk to me? Is this asking attention? Is this questioning the world? Does this change the way I think in any way? That's what art is there for, I think, isn't it? Is to somehow, just to quote Dylan, once a good poem has been added to the world is never the same. So a good, great piece of art, to some respect, to some aspect, to some respect, will change your conception of the world, or will question the world,
Yeah, absolutely. What did Dylan offer that challenged you then?
The first time that I really connected with it would have been, as I think it would have been when I was pregnant. I was living in South Carolina in America, pregnant with my first child, and I'd found this little Christmas bauble, and the Christmas bauble was a tiny book, and the tiny book was A Child's Christmas.
Yeah.
And it was the very end of the pregnancy, and time is so long, boring, waiting to see what the hell's going to happen. But so I sat down and I read it, this little tiny book, and being so far away from home, and being reminded of the beauty, the power of Christmas it's almost the Christmases that never happened anyway, you know, but it's the hope of Christmas, or your idea of what Christmas means or what it is. It's bigger than the thing itself. And somehow Dylan Thomas has been able to capture that bigger than itself, deeper than itself, more emotionally filled, more, I don't know, tangible idea of hope and nostalgia and love and memory and family and ritual. You don't even have to have been born the same time as him or have been around the same time as him. Inside this tiny little book was the essence of what I hanker for at Christmas time. And what I imagine many people hanker for or aim for or feel, or, you know, it's such a magical time of year. And he just got it just by his collection of words.
Yeah.
You
In
get
this,
it?
in
Yeah.
that little book.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And he does all you've just described there without being sentimental about it.
Absolutely. And you know, it's hilarious as well. You know, he's got the burping, snoring uncles. He's got the aunties that are getting absolutely hammered. You know, he got Auntie Hannah. Auntie Hannah's my favourite in A Child's Christmas. If you read A Child's Christmas again and just hone in on what Auntie Hannah is up to, she's literally sneaking off a little bit of this, a little bit of rum, a little bit of, you know, sherry, whatever. And by the end, she's out in the garden singing her heart out. It really is hilarious. And you get the idea of all of the sort of Lego pieces of Christmas going on, not just in his house, but outside the house. You've got a ghost story within it and a lonely old voice. King Wenceslas looked out, you know, and they're going out caroling and then running back to the house. It is stories within stories within stories.
Is it the stories that you warm to mostly with Dylan more than the poetry?
Well, you know, that's the thing with Dylan, isn't it? It's not just plot. It's the, and I'm going to say, I don't like saying it too often, but the genius use of words, the sound of the words, the rhythm of the words, the savouring of every single ounce of what you can do with syllables and assonance and dissonance and alliteration, and just the sheer enjoyment of our collection of words that we have in the English and sometimes Welsh language. You know, in A Child's Christmas is a great example of lists and lists and lists and lists of the useless presents and the useful presents. Yes. And the idea about wasps. You know, you had got a book about wasps, and the question, why? Yeah. You know, I mean, the thing is with Dylan as well, and once you read these pieces of work, they just they repeat in your head quite often. You know, when I see a wasp now, I just think of A Child's Christmas and Dylan's question, why is a wasp? What's that for?
Everything about the wasp except why. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. That the sound of words, maybe it is no coincidence. It is why so many musicians like yourself warm to Dylan's work, because does that make his work easy to work with, because his work already depends on sound?
Absolutely. I mean, he wanted his work to be read aloud. He didn't like to explain too much. He would just say, right, I'm going to read aloud now, without a very overbearing, boisterous, dramatic, very English plummy voice of his, you know. So he relished the sound of it. So yeah, they're like songs. You can really quite happily just call his work songs if you want.
Right, we'll come to another particular book, Under Milkwood.
Take the jacket off, Alun. Yeah, because
Aha.
That's better. That jacket's just meant to be a dust jacket. It was never meant to be the cover. So there you go. That's better.
Yes, right. But what it says interesting, the wording that you obviously carefully chosen. A retelling. It's not you know, an adaptation or any other word you could use. So why choose retelling?
Well, I don't think that's actually the best way of describing it, because we are using Dylan's words. So I would not dare try and rewrite it or retell it. All I was trying to do is to make a version of Dylan's work of the Undermilk Woods so I could read it to young children, so that they could get to hear the sounds of Dylan's writing and words, and get introduced to all these characters in a length that was appropriate for babies and toddlers and 5 and 6 year olds, because I started telling my children about Undermilk Wood and the characters when they were that young, and they just wanted to know more. So we made it with Kate Evans, the illustrator. I worked very closely with Kate because I didn't want to lose any of the detail. So you'll find a lot of the text lost in the detail of the illustrations. So that I made it into picture book so that we could introduce Dylan Thomas to a very, very young audience.
Yeah, absolutely. But how, I mean, you said you lived with the work for so long, you know the work, it's known the world over. But how do you approach and say, right, I'm going to try and work on this now? Was that a bit daunting?
Yeah, absolutely.
I thought it was, yeah.
You just begin, as he says at the beginning. And then I gradually just try to pull out the bits that I thought would really appeal to a child's sense of humor. So Mr. and Mrs. Pugh, so that the schoolmaster and his wife, they don't have a very good relationship, let's say. So he's reading all of these books about poisoning people because he's like, anyway, so then children find that very funny, you know, that this sort of slapstick humor, it's like a pantomime, or it's like old you know, like Red Riding Hood or something. There's actually quite dark topics in some of the most striking stories, and certainly in Undermilk Wood he doesn't shy away from death and mortality and sex and lust and all these things. And whilst I wanted to make it appropriate for really young children, I couldn't completely take away the humor in it.
No.
So you've got the chap with the 2 wives and the 2 wives in there, and you know, it's all in there basically. I hope I haven't, you wouldn't want to present any form of Dylan Thomas without his sense of humor and his cheek and mischief. So I think that's still in there without it being too much of death and salaciousness.
Yeah, absolutely. But because there are dead people in here, quite a lot in the original work.
Well, it opens with the dead sailors, really.
Yeah,
you know.
exactly. Yeah.
But you know, we all love a ghost story. Even when you're tiny, you love ghost stories. So the idea of ghosts and other beings is pretty cool, whatever age you are.
Yeah. Were there bits that you found really difficult to cut? You tackle the sunset prayer, Eli Jenkins's prayer, for example, and that's not in its entirety.
No.
What was the thinking behind that?
Because I know how it is to read to a very young child, and I just wanted to move quite quickly. It reads around 20 minutes long, and when you read bedtime stories to youngsters, that between 10 and 20 minutes, and they're hopefully snoring. So I always wanted to just make a really welcome, digestible introduction. You know, if you want the full fat version with all the teeth, go to the original, you know. But for children, I wanted them to want more, and then that gives them a whole world to enter when they're ready, having given them just enough, hopefully, to have made them fall in love with this world.
Have you had enough opportunity yet for children to give you their reaction?
Yeah, they love things like the little details of the the babies sleeping in the trees, which was kind of inspired by the snuggeries of babies that Dylan Thomas writes about, and the little mice with gloves on. Again, there's nothing in the book, in the illustrations, that is not mentioned in the text. And there are the parings and the dandruff and the sprats and the bones. They become like dusk, and all of it's mentioned in the original. So it's just so much to work with in terms of imagery, as we know with Dylan Thomas's work. So it was a lot of fun trying to squeeze in as much of the detail in the illustration. So that's what they kind of hone in on. So the other children, they loved the arsenic, the idea, and then being hit on the bum with a rhubarb stick. That was a really difficult section to distill, when the children are all playing Gwenny, Gwenny, you know, all that sing along stuff. But I also didn't want to, I wanted it to be like a place where they would feel the love of Under Milkwood, of Llaregeb Hill. There's a lot of love in the text.
Yeah, you're saying that lots of imagery, but of course always described as a play for voices. So, but those images are created by the sounds and then interpreted, as you are doing, with the words and the pictures. So it shows how rich the original was.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you can still find new things in it. You can return to it again and again and again, and some bits will stick out more than others. So it's such a remarkable piece of work.
Okay, you know, you've had a taste of doing this. You've done other Dylan-related projects, which are more kind of music-based before. This is now out. Where next? Any other ideas?
Yeah, no, for sure. With Under Milkwood, well, I'm sorry, with A Child's Christmas, that I wrote music with Mason Neely to A Child's Christmas, and that got picked up by Ballet Cymru, who made a ballet out of it in, when would that have been? 2016 or 17? So that got picked up again last year as a ballet, and it's going to be done again this year as a ballet. So Child's Christmas is a ballet. And then I was approached by a theatre in Minneapolis. So they picked up the music that we'd written for A Child's Christmas, and that became a musical this year for the first, no, I said that in 2022, Christmas just gone. So it's become a musical, and they're hoping to repeat that again. So we're hoping to do the same with Under Milkwood, to make Under Milkwood a children's version, which is what this is that I've been working on, into a ballet. And then I've got another project ongoing with his poetry, but I can't really give too much of that detail away as yet.
Keep us posted. When you can, let us know. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. Well, Cerys, thanks so much for that. It's really great to hear your insight into Dylan and his work, and this work of yours based on his is superb, and you do see things. Reading Eli Jenkins's prayer, come back to that, and I Steddfod tent, then I'm thinking, what's that doing there? But of course, you know, then you see it, something that you might have missed in reading.
Eli Jenkins was obsessed with the Steddfod, eh?
Yeah,
No,
I got it in the end.
Yeah. So where he appears in the Double Spread, there's like druids flying around and angels singing in this. It's all in the text, and that was the beauty. So I'd rake through the text again and again and again to try and make sure that I could fit as much of it into a children's version as I could. It was really got quite obsessive about it. But Kate Evans was brilliant to work with, because I was really like adamant to try and fit everything in.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so glad that you managed. It's a superb work, and really appreciate your time sharing with us from Dylan's birthplace on International Dylan's Day. So thanks very much, Cerys. Diolch yn fawr.
Honestly, such a pleasure to talk with you about it, and happy Dylan's Day to everybody today, and hopefully see you again next year.
That's the book with the dust cover taken up. Which I shall leave here for people who are in the house to have a look at. Right, that's end of part one. Yeah, and there's so much going on. There's so many. We've heard so much about interpretations of Undermilk words from Cerys, Andrew, and Robin. It's fascinating. For those in the house, the work that we've seen handed round, that's there for us to have a look. And then upstairs as well, in the bedroom where Dylan was born, there are some framed stills out for you to see as well. So make the most of those. We'll have a short 10-15 minute break. Please come back to us. And in the second half, we will see the work that these two gentlemen made all those years ago, the animated film. I can't wait for that.
Okay.
Thank you. Happy days. Welcome back. Part two. We're going to see the work that these two gentlemen created, as we said earlier. And before we do so, just a very quick explanation, a technical thing that will help us appreciate the beginning of the film that we're going to see.
Yeah, this film was made on 35mm film, and when it's projected, it's perfect. But in the conversion to DVD or to digital, the grading has been lost at the beginning of it. It's a bit too dark. So if you think, first couple of minutes are too dark, just bear with it. Brightens up a bit.
Yeah.
But it's just nowadays with digital technology, you'd be able to brighten it all up. But this was converted.
This is historical. Absolutely.
So the background are too dark on this version. Just at the beginning, apart from that, it's fine.
Great. Well, with that in mind, we shall watch your work. Happy days. Let's go.
To begin at the beginning. It is spring. Listen. Time passes. Come closer now. Only you can hear. And big. Captain Cat, a retired blind sea captain, asleep in his bunk in the sea-shelled ship-in-bottle ship-shaped best cabin of schooner house, dreams of never such seas as any that swamped the decks of his SS Kidwelly bellying over the bedclothes, and jellyfish slippery sucking him down salt deep into the davy dark where the fish come biting out and nibble him down to his wishbone and the long drowned nuzzle up to him.
Remember me, Captain? You're dancing, Williams. I lost my step in Nantucket.
Do you see me, Captain? The white ball talking. I'm Tom Fred, the donkey man. We shared the same girl once. Her name was Mrs. Probert.
Rosie Probert, 33 Duck Lane. Come on up, boys. I'm dead.
Hold me, Captain. I'm Jonah Jarvis. Come to a bad end. Very enjoyable.
Alfred Pomeroy Jones, sea lawyer, born in Mumble, sung like a linnet, crowned you with a flagon, tattooed with mermaids, thirst like a dredger, died of blisters.
This skull at your ear, boys.
Curly Featherman! Tell my auntie it was me that pawned the Ormolu clock. Aye, aye, Curly.
Tell my missus, no, I never. I never done what she said, I never.
Yes, they did.
And who brings coconuts and shawls and parrots to my Gwen now?
How's it above?
How's the tenors in Dowlice?
Who milks the cows in my squin?
When she smiles, is there dimples?
What's the smell of parsley?
Oh, my dead dears.
Come now, drift up the dark. Come up the drifting sea-dark street now, in the dark night sea-sawing like the sea, to the Bible-black, airless attic, over Jack Black the cobbler's shop, where alone and savagely Jack Black sleeps in a nightshirt tied to his ankles with elastic and dreams of chasing the naughty couples on the grass-green gooseberry double bed of the wood, flogging the toss-pots in the spit and sawdust, driving out the bare, bold girls from the sixpenny hops of his nightmares.
Wachkavir! Wachkavir!
From where you are, you can hear in Cockle Row in the spring, moonless night, Miss Price, dressmaker and sweet shopkeeper, dream of her lover, tall as the town clock tower, Samson syrup gold-maned, whacking-thighed and piping hot, thunderbolt-based and barnacle-breasted, flailing up the cockles with his eyes like blow lamps, and swooping low over her lonely, loving, hot water bottle body.
Mavanui Price.
Mr. Mark Edward.
I am a draper, mad with love. Throw away your little bed socks and your Welsh wool knitted jacket. I will warm the sheets like an electric toaster. I will lie by your side like the Sunday roast.
I will knit you a wallet to forget-me-not blue for the money to be comfy. I will warm your heart by the fire so that you can slip it under your vest when the shop is closed.
Mavanui, before the mice gnaw at your bottom drawer, will you say?
Yes, Mog, yes, Mog, yes, yes, yes.
And all the bells of the tills of the town shall ring for our wedding.
And in the little pink-eyed cottage next to the undertaker's lie alone the 17 snoring, gentle stone of Mr. Wallow. Rabbit catcher, barber, herbalist, cat doctor, quack, his fat, pink hands palms up over the edge of the patchwork quilt, his black boots neat and tidy in the washing basin, his bowler on a nail above the bed, a milk stout and a slice of cold bread pudding under the pillow. And dripping in the dark, he dreams of
This little piggy went to market. This little piggy stayed at home. This little piggy had roast beef. This little piggy had none. And this little piggy went all the way home to...
Waldo!
Yes, Broadway, love?
Oh, what'll the neighbours say? What'll the neighbours?
Poor Mrs. Waldo, what she puts up with. Never should have married if she didn't have to. Same as her mother. There's a husband for you. Bad as his father. And you know where he ended. Up in the asylum. Oh, it makes my heart bleed. What he'll do for drink. He sold the pianola and her sewing machine. Falling in the gutter. Talking to the lamppost. Using language. Singing in the W. Poor Mrs. Waldo.
Waldo.
Ash, love, ash. I'm widower Waldo now.
Now, in her iceberg white, holily laundered crinoline nightgown and the virtuous polar sheets, in her spruced and scoured, dust-defying bedroom in trig and trim Bayview, a house for paying guests at the top of the town. Mrs. Ogmore Pritchard, widow, twice, of Mr. Ogmore, linoleum, retired, and Mr. Pritchard, failed bookmaker, who, maddened by bezooming, swabbing and scrubbing, the voice of the vacuum cleaner and the fume of polish, ironically swallowed disinfectant, fidgets in her rinsed sleep, wakes in a dream, and nudges in the ribs. Dead, Mr. Ogmore. Dead, Mr. Pritchard. Ghostly on either side.
Mr. Ogmore, Mr. Pritchard, it is time to inhale your balsam.
Oh, Mrs. Ogmore. Oh, Mrs. Pritchard.
Soon it will be time to get up. Tell me your tasks, in order.
I must put my pyjamas in the drawer marked pyjamas. I must take my cold bath, which is good for me. I must wear my flannel band to ward off sciatica. I must dress behind the curtain and put on my apron. I must blow my nose.
In the garden, if you please.
In a piece of tissue paper, which I afterwards burn.
I must take my salts, which are
I must boil the drinking water because of
my
germs.
herb tea, which is free
Have
from
a charcoal biscuit, which is good for me.
one pipe of asthma mixture.
In the woodshed, if you please.
And dust the parlour and spray the
I must
canal.
put on rubber gloves and search the peak for fleas.
I must dust the blinds and then I must raise them.
And before you let the sun in, mind it wipes its shoes.
Mary Ann Saylor's dreams of...
The Garden of Eden.
She comes in her smock frock and clogs.
Away from the cool, scrubbed, cobbled kitchen, with the Sunday school pictures on the whitewashed wall, and the farmer's almanac hung above the settle, and the sides of bacon on the ceiling hooks, and goes down the cockle-shelled paths of that apple pie kitchen garden, ducking under the dippo's clothes pegs, catching her apron on the blackcurrant bushes, past bean rows and onion bed and tomatoes ripening on the wall, toward the old man playing the harmonium in the orchard, and sits down on the grass at his side, and shells the green peas that grow up through the lap of her frock that brushes the dew.
Cries Organ Morgan, the organist, in his dreams.
There is perturbation and music in Coronation Street. All the spouses are honking like geese, and the baby's singing opera. P.C. Artilleries has got his truncheon out and is playing cadenzas by the pump. The cows from Sunday Meadow ring like reindeer. And on the roof of Handel Villa, see the women's welfare hoofing bloomered in the moon.
Willy-nilly postman asleep up street walks 14 miles to deliver the post as he does every day of the night and rat-a-tats hard and sharp on Mrs. Willy-nilly.
Don't spank me, please, teacher.
But every night of her married life, she has been late for school. Sinbad sailors over the taproom of the Sailor's Arms hugs his damp pillow whose secret name is... Mrs. Rose Cottage's eldest, May, peels off her pink and white skin in a furnace, in a tower, in a cave, in a waterfall, in a wood, and waits there, raw as an onion, for Mr. Right to leap up the burning, tall, hollow splashes of leaves like a brilliantine trout.
Call me Dolores, like they do in the story.
And the inspectors of cruelty fly down into Mrs. Butcher Bynum's dream to persecute Mr. Bynum for selling
owl meat, dog's eyes, man chop.
Mr. Bynum, in Butcher's bloodied apron, spring heels down Coronation Street, a finger not his own in his mouth. Straight-faced in his cunning sleep, he pulls the legs of his dreams and...
Hunting on pigback, shoots down the wild giblets.
The owls are hunting. Look, over Bethesda gravestones one hoots and swoops and catches a mouse by Hannah Reese, beloved wife. And in Coronation Street, which you alone can see, it is so dark under the chapel in the skies. The Reverend Eli Jenkins, poet, preacher, turns in his deep towards dawn sleep and dreams of
I still would die.
He intricately rhymes to the music of Cruth and Pibgor all night long in his druid seedy nighty in a beer tent black with parchs. Mr. Pugh, schoolmaster, fathoms asleep, pretends to be sleeping, spies Foxy round the droop of his nightcap and whistles up murder. Mrs. Organ Morgan, groceress, coiled grey like a dormouse, her paws to her ears, conjures
silence.
She sleeps very dulcet in a cove of wool, and trumpeting Organ Morgan at her side snores no louder than a spider. Time passes. Listen. Time passes. An owl flies home past Bethesda to a chapel in an oak, and the dawn inches up. Stand on this hill. This is Llarigib Hill, old as the hills, high, cool, and green. And from this small circle of stones, made not by druids, but by Mrs. Bynum's Billy, you can see all the town below you sleeping in the first of the dawn. You can hear the lovesick wood pigeons mooning in bed. A dog barks in his sleep, farmyards away. The town ripples like a lake in the waking haze. The principality of the sky lightens now over our green hill into spring morning, larked and crowed and belling. Who pulls the town hall bell rope at blind, Captain Cat? One by one the sleepers are wrung out of sleep this one morning as every morning. And soon you shall see the chimneys slow up flying snow as Captain Cat, in sailor's cap and sea boots, announces today with his loud get out of bed bell. The Reverend Eli Jenkins in Bethesda House gropes out of bed into his preacher's black, combs back his bard's white hair, forgets to wash, pads barefoot downstairs, opens the front door, stands in the doorway, and, looking out at the day and up at the eternal hill and hearing the sea break and the gab of birds, remembers his own verses and tells them softly to empty Coronation Street that is rising and raising its blinds.
Dear Gwalior, I know there are towns lovelier than ours, and fairer hills and loftier far, and groves more full of flowers, and boskier woods more blithe with spring, and bright with birds adorning, and sweeter bards than I to sing their praise this beauteous morning. A tiny dingle is Milkwood by Golden Grove neath Gronger, but let me choose, and oh, I should love all my life and longer to stroll among our trees and stray in Gwsgog Lane on Donkey Down, and hear the dewies sing all day, and never, never leave the town.
Mr. Pugh, in the schoolhouse opposite, takes up the morning tea to Mrs. Pugh and whispers on the stairs.
Here's your arsenic, dear, and your weed killer biscuit. I've throttled your parakeet. I've spat in the vases. I've put cheese in the mouse holes. Here's your nice tea, dear.
Too much sugar.
You haven't tasted it yet, dear.
Too much milk, then. Has Mr. Jenkins said his poetry?
Yes, dear.
Then it's time to get up. Give me my glasses. No, not my reading glasses. I want to look out. I want to see.
Lily Smalls, the treasure, down on her red knees, washing the front step.
She's tucked her dress in her bloomers. Oh, the baggage.
P.C. Attila Reese, ox-broad, barge-booted, stamping out of handcuff house in a heavy beef-red huff, black-browed under his damp helmet.
He's going to arrest Polygata. Mark my words.
What for, dear?
For having babies.
And lumbering down towards the Strand to see that the sea is still there. Morgan at his bedroom window, playing chords on the sill to the morning fishwife gulls who, heckling over Donkey Street, observe...
Me, dye bread, hurrying to the bakery, pushing in my shirt tails, buttoning my waistcoat. Ping goes a button. Why can't they sew them? No time for breakfast, nothing for breakfast. There's wives for you.
Me, Mrs. Dyebread one, capped and shawled and no corset. Nice to be comfy, nice to be nice. Clogging on the cobbles to stir up a neighbour. Oh, Mrs. Sarah, can you spare a loaf, love? Dyebread forgot the bread.
Me, Mrs. Dyebread too. Gypsy to kill in a silky scarlet petticoat above my knees. Dirty, pretty knees. See my body through my petticoat, brown as a berry. High heel shoes with one heel missing. Tortoiseshell comb in my bright black slinky hair. Nothing else at all but a dab of scent. Lolling gaudy at the doorway. Tell your fortune in the tea leaves. Scowling at the sunshine. Lighting up my pipe.
Our frying pans spit, kettles and cats purr in the kitchen. The town smells of seaweed and breakfast, all the way down from Bayview, where Mrs. Ogmore Pritchard, in smock and turban, big bezoom to engage the dust, picks at her starchless bread and sips lemon rind tea, to Bottom Cottage, where Mr. Waldo, in bowler and bib, gobbles his bubble and squeak and kippers and swigs from the sauce bottle. Mr. Pugh
remembers ground glass as he juggles his omelette.
Mrs. Pugh
Nags the salt cellar.
willy-nilly postman
Downs his last bucket of black brackish tea and rumbles out bandy to the clucking back where the hens twitch and grieve for their tea-soaked sops.
Mrs. Willy-nilly
Full of tea to her double chin brim. Broods and bubbles over her coven of kettles on a hissing hot range. Always ready to steam open the May.
Reverend Eli Jenkins
Finds a rhyme and dips his pen in his cocoa.
Captain Cat in his galley
Blind and fine-fingered, savours his sea fry.
From Vine and Butcher's in Coronation Street, the smell of fried liver sidles out with onions on its breath. And listen, in the dark breakfast room behind the shop, Mr. and Mrs. Bynon, waited upon by that treasure, enjoy between bites their every morning hullabaloo, and Mrs. Bynon slips the gristly bits under the tasseled tablecloth to her fat cat.
She likes the liver, Ben.
She ought to do, Bess. It's her brother's.
Oh, do you hear that, Lily?
Yes, ma'am.
We're eating pusscat.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, you cat butcher.
It was doctored, mind.
Oh, what's that got to do with it?
Yesterday we had more.
Oh, Lily.
Monday otter, Tuesday shrews.
Go on, Mrs. Bynon. He's the biggest liar in town.
Don't you dare say that about Mr. Bynon.
Well, everybody knows it, man.
Mr. Bynon never tells a lie, do you, Ben?
No, Bess. And now I am going out after the corgis with my little cleaver.
Oh,
Up the street in the Sailor's Arms, Sinbad Sailors, grandson of Mary Ann Sailors, draws a pint in the sunlit bar. The ship's clock in the bar says 11:30. 11:30 is opening time. The hands of the clock have stayed still at 11:30 for 50 years. It is always opening time in the Sailor's Arms.
Here's to me, Sinbad.
All over the town, babies and old men are cleaned and put into their broken prams and wheeled onto the sunlit, cockled cobbles or out into the backyards under the dancing underclothes and left. A baby cries.
I want my pipe, and he wants his bottle.
Noses are wiped, heads picked, hair combed, paws scrubbed, ears boxed, and the children shrilled off to school. Fishermen grumble to their nets. No good boy who goes out in the dinghy Zanzibar, ships the oars, drifts slowly in the dab-filled bay, and lying on his back in the unbaled water among crabs' legs and tangled lines, looks up at the spring sky.
I don't know who's up there, and I don't care.
Syrup is sold in the post office. A car drives to market, full of fowls and a farmer. Milk churns stand at Coronation Corner like short, silver policemen. And sitting at the open window of Schooner House, blind Captain Cat hears all the mourning of the town.
Maggie Richards,
Wait a minute, I lost my compass.
Ricky Rees, Tommy Powell, our Sal, little Getaway, Billy Swansea with the dog's voice, one of Mr. Waldo, Nasty Humphrey, Jackie with the sniff. Where's Dickie's auntie and the boy from T-Pant? Or perhaps they got the rash again. Somebody's hit Maggie Richards. 2-1 is Billy Swansea. Never trust a boy who barks. Right again, it's Billy.
And the children's voices cry away.
That's willy-nilly knocking at Bayview. Rat-a-tat, very soft. The knocker's got a kid glove on. Who sent a letter to Mrs. Ogmore Pritchard?
Morning, Mrs. Ogmore Pritchard.
Good morning, postman.
Here's a letter for you with stamped and addressed envelope enclosed, all the way from Bilthwells. A gentleman wants to study birds. And can he have accommodation for 2 weeks and a bath vegetarian?
No.
You wouldn't know he was in the house, Mrs. Ogmore Pritchard. He'd be out in the mornings at the bang of dawn with his bag of breadcrumbs and his little telescope.
And come home at all hours covered with feathers? I don't want persons in my nice clean rooms breathing all over the chairs.
Cross my heart, he won't breathe.
And putting their feet on my carpets and sneezing on my china and sleeping in my sheets.
He only wants a single bed, Mrs. Ogmore Pritchard.
And back she goes to the kitchen to polish the potatoes. 3, 4, 5. That's Mrs. Rose Cottage. What's today? Today she gets a letter from her sister at Gorslas. How's the twins' teeth? He's stopping at schoolhouse.
Morning, Mrs. Pugh. Mrs. Ogmore Pritchard won't have a gentleman in from Bilthwells because he'll sleep in her sheets. Mrs. Rose Cottage's sister and Gorslas's twins have got to have them out.
Give me the parcel.
It's for Mr. Pugh, Mrs. Pugh.
Never you mind. What's inside it?
A book called Lives of the Great Poisoners.
As the clip-clop of horses on the sun-honeyed cobbles of the humming streets, hammering of horseshoes, gobble, quack and cackle, tom-tit twitter from the bird-ounce boughs, braying on Donkey Down. bread is baking, pigs are grunting, chop goes the butcher, milk churns bell, tills ring, sheep cough, dog shouts, saws sing. Oh, the spring whinny and morning move from the clog dancing farms, the gulls gab and rabble on the boat bobbing river and sea, and the cockles bubbling in the sand, scamper of sanderlings, curlew cry, crow, caw, pigeon coo, clock strike, bull bellow, and the ragged gabble of the bear garden school as the women scratch and babble in Mrs. Organ Morgan's general shop, where everything is sold: custard, buckets, henna, rat traps, shrimp nets, sugar, stamps, confetti, paraffin, hatchets, whistles.
Mrs. Ogmore Pritchard. La-di-da. Got a man in Billthwells.
And he got a little telescope to look at birds. Willy-nilly said, remember her first husband? He didn't need a telescope.
He looked at them undressing through the keyhole.
And he used to shout, tally-ho!
But Mr. Ogmore was a proper gentleman, even though he hanged his collie. Men are brutes on the quiet.
And how's Organ Morgan, Mrs. Morgan?
You look dead, beat.
It's Organ all the time with him. Up every night until midnight playing the organ.
Oh, I'm a martyr to music.
And in willy-nilly the postman's dark and sizzling, damp, tea-coated, misty, pygmy kitchen, where the spitting cat kettles throb and hop on the range, Mrs. Willy-nilly steams open Mr. Mont Edwards' letter to Miss Mavanu Price and reads it aloud to Willy-nilly by the squint of the spring sun through the one sealed window running with tears, while the drugged, bedraggled hens at the back door whimper and snivel for the licorice bog-black tea.
Business is very poorly. Polly Garter bought 2 garters with roses, but she never got stockings, so what is the use, I say? Mr. Waldo tried to sell me a woman's nightie outsize. He said he found it, and we know where. I sold a packet of pins to Sinbad sailors to pick his teeth. If this goes on, I shall be in the poorhouse. My heart is in your bosom, and yours is in mine. God be with you always, Mavanui Price, and keep you lovely for me in his heavenly mansion. I must stop now and remain your eternal Maud Edward.
And then a little message with a rubber stamp. Shop at Moggs.
And willy-nilly, rumbling, jockeys out again to the 3-seated shack called the House of Commons in the back where the hens weep, and sees in sudden spring shine herring gulls heckling down to the harbour where the fishermen spit and prop the morning up, and eye the fishy sea smooth to the sea's end as it lulls in bloom. Green and gold money, tobacco, tin salmon, hats with feathers, pots of fish paste, warmth for the winter to be, weave and leap in it rich and slippery in the flash and shapes of fishes through the cold sea streets. But with blue, lazy eyes, the fishermen gaze at that milkmaid whispering water with no ruck or ripple, as though it blew great guns and serpents and typhooned the town.
Too rough for fishing today.
And they thank God and gob at a gull for luck. And moss slow and silent make their way uphill from the still, still sea towards the sailors' arms as the children spank and scamper rough and singing out of school into the draggle-tail yard. And Captain Cat at his window says soft to himself the words of their song.
Fluffy snail, peppered baby with the milking tail. Fluffy snail, the Johnny Crack. Wanna pull it out, I wanna put it back.
Oh, it's my turn now, said Flossie Snail, to take the baby from the milking pail. And it's my turn now, said Johnny Crack, to smack it on the head and put it back. Johnny Crack and Flossie Snail kept their baby in a milking pail. One would put it back and one would pull it out, and pull it out to drink water and stuff. Poor Johnny Crack and Flossie Snail always used to say the sad and well was good for a baby in a milking pail.
Mrs. Diebread 1 and Mrs. Diebread 2 are sitting outside their house in Donkey Lane, one darkly, one plumply, blooming in the quick, dewy sun.
Cross my palm with silver. Silver? Out of our housekeeping money. Aha! What do you see, lovey? I see a feather bed with 3 pillows on it. and a text above the bed. I can't read what it says. There's great clouds blowing. Now they've blown away. God is love, the text says. That's our bed. And now it's vanished. The sun's spinning like a top. Who's this coming out of the sun? It's a hairy little man with big pink lips. He got a walleye. It's Di! It's Di Bread! The feather bed's floating back. The little man's taken his boots off. He's pulling his shirt over his head. He's beating his chest with his fists. He's climbing into bed. Go on. Go on. There's two women in bed. Yes. He looks at them both with his head cocked on one side. He's whistling through his teeth. Now he grips his little arms round one of the women. Which one? Which one? I can't see anymore. There's great clouds blowing again. Ugh, the mean old clouds.
The Reverend Eli Jenkins, busy on his morning calls, stops outside the welfare hall to hear Polly Garter as she scrubs the floors for the Mothers' Union dance tonight.
Oh, Tom, Dick, and Harry were three fine men, and I'll never have such loving again. But little Willie Wee, who took me on his knee, little Willie Weasel was the man for me.
Praise the Lord. We are a musical nation.
And the Reverend Eli Jenkins hurries on through the town to visit the sick with jelly and poems. The town's as full as a lovebird's egg.
There goes the Reverend,
says Mr. Waldo at the smoked herring-brown window of the unwashed Sailor's Arms.
with his brolly and his odes. Fill him up, Sinbad. I'm on the treacle today.
And the morning school is over, and Captain Cat, at his curtained schooner's porthole, open to the spring sun tides, hears the naughty, forfeiting children tumble and rhyme on the cobbles. Gossamer Bynum, high heels out of school.
I don't care if he is coming.
She whispers to her salad day deep self.
I want to gobble him up. I don't care if he does drop his H's.
She tells the stripped and mother of the world, big-beamed and eve-hipped spring of herself.
So long as he's all cucumber and hooves.
Sinbad sailors watches her go by, demure and proud and schoolmarm, in her crisp flower dress and sun-defying hat, with never a look or lilt or wriggle, the butcher's unmelting ice-maiden daughter, veiled forever from the hungry hug of his eyes.
Oh, Gossamer Bynum, why are you so proud?
He grieves to his Guinness.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful Gossamer Bee, I wish that you were for me. I wish you were not so educated.
In the blind, drawn, dark dining room of schoolhouse, dusty and echoing as a dining room in a vault, Mr. and Mrs. Pugh are silent over cold, grey cottage pie. Mr. Pugh reads as he forks the shroud meat in from Lives of the Great Poisoners.
Persons with manners do not read at table. Some persons were brought up in pigsties.
Pigs don't read at table, dear. Pigs can't read, my dear.
I know one who can.
Alone in the hissing laboratory of his wishes, Mr. Pugh minces among bad bats and Jeroboams, tiptoes through spinneys of murdering herbs, agony dancing in his crucibles, and mixes, especially for Mrs. Pugh, a venomous porridge unknown to toxicologists, which will scald and viper through her until her ears fall off like figs, her toes grow big and black as balloons, and steam comes screaming out of her navel.
You know best, dear,
says Mr. Pugh, and quick as a flash, he ducks her in rat soup.
puts that book by a trough, Mr. Pugh?
It's a theological work, my dear. Lives of the great saints.
Mrs. Pugh smiles. An icicle forms in the cold air of the dining vault.
I saw you talking to a saint this morning. Saint Polygata. She was martyred again last night. Mrs. Organ Morgan saw her with Mr. Waldo.
And when they saw me, they pretended they were looking for nests.
Said Mrs. Organ Morgan to her husband, with her mouth full of fish as a pelican's.
But you don't go nesting in long combinations, I said to myself, like Mr. Waldo was wearing. And your dress nearly over your head like Polygata's. Oh, they didn't fool me. And when you think of all those babies she's got, then all I can say is she'd better give up bird nesting, that's all I can say. It isn't the right kind of hobby at all for a woman who can't say no, even to midgets. Remember Bob Spit? He wasn't any bigger than a baby, and he gave her two. But they're two nice boys, I will say that. Fred Spit and Arthur. Sometimes I like Fred best, and sometimes I like Arthur. Who do you like best, Olga?
Oh, Bach, without any doubt. Bach every time for me.
Organ Morgan, you haven't been listening to a word I've said. It's organ all the time with you.
And then, Palestrina.
The sunny, slow, lulling afternoon yawns and moons through the dozy town. The sea lolls, laps and idles in with fishes sleeping in its lap. The meadows still as Sunday. The shut-eyed tasseled bulls, the goat and daisy dingles nap happy and lazy. The dun duck ponds snooze. Clouds sag and pillow on Llarygib Hill. Captain Cat, at his window thrown wide to the sun and the clippered seas he sailed long ago when his eyes were blue and bright, slumbers and voyages. Ear-ringed and rolling, I love you, Rosie Probert, tattooed on his belly, he brawls with broken bottles in the fug and babel of the dark dock bars, roves with a herd of short and good time cows in every naughty port, and twines and souses with the drowned and blousy-breasted dead. He weeps as he sleeps and sails. Mrs. Probert?
From Duck Lane, Jack. Quack twice and ask for Rosie.
Is the one love of his sea life that was sardined with women.
What seas were rocking my little deckhand, my favorite husband, in your sea boots and hunger, my duck, my whaler, my honey, my daddy, my pretty sugar sailor, with my name on your belly, when you were a boy, long, long ago.
I'll tell you no lies. The only sea I saw was the seesaw sea with you riding on it. Lie down, lie easy. Let me shipwreck in your thighs. Rosie Probert.
Remember her. She is forgetting. The earth which filled her mouth is vanishing from her. Remember me. I have forgotten you. I am going into the darkness of the darkness forever. I have forgotten that I was ever born.
Look, Captain Cat is crying. He's crying all over his nose.
The afternoon buzzes like lazy bees round the flowers round May Rose Cottage.
He loves me. He loves me not. He loves me. He loves me not. He loves me. The dirty old fool.
Lazy she lies alone in clover and sweet grass, 17 and never been sweet in the grass. Behold. The Reverend Eli Jenkins, inky in his cool front parlour or poem room, tells only the truth in his life work. The population, main industry, shipping, history, topography, flora and fauna of the town he worships in. The White Book of Llaregid. Portraits of famous bards and preachers, all fur and wool from the squint to the kneecaps, hang over him heavy as sheep, next to faint lady watercolours of pale green milkwood like a lettuce salad, dying. His mother, propped against a palm in a pot, with a wedding ring waist and bust like a black cloth dining table, suffers in her stays.
Oh, angels, be careful there with your knives and forks,
he prays. There is no known likeness of his father, Esau, who, undog-collared because of his little weakness, was scythed to the bone one harvest by mistake when sleeping with his weakness in the corn. He lost all ambition and died with one leg.
Poor Dad.
Grieved the Reverend Eli.
To die of drink and agriculture.
Now the town is dusk. Each cobble, donkey, goose and gooseberry street is a thoroughfare of dusk and ceremonial dust, and night's first darkening snow, and the sleep of birds drift under and through the live dusk of this place of love. Llaregid is the capital of dusk. Mrs. Ogmore Pritchard, at the first drop of the dusk showers, seals all her sea view doors, draws the germ-free blinds, sits erect as a dry dream on a high-backed, hygienic chair, and wills herself to cold, quick sleep. At once, at twice, Mr. Ogmore and Mr. Pritchard, who all dead day long have been gossiping like ghosts in the woodshed, planning the loveless destruction of their glass widow, reluctantly sigh and sidle into her clean house.
You first, Mr. Ogmore. After you, Mr. Pritchard. No, Mr. Ogmore. You widowed her first.
I love you both.
Oh, Mrs. Ogmore. Oh, Mrs. Pritchard.
Soon it will be time to go to bed. Tell me your tasks, in order.
We must take our pajamas from the drawer marked pajamas.
And then you must take them off.
Down in the dusking town, May Rose Cottage, still lying in clover, listens to the nanny goats chew, draws circles of lipstick round her nipples.
I'm fast. I'm a bad lot. God will strike me dead. I'm 17. I'll go to hell.
She tells the goats.
You just wait. I'll sin till I blow up.
And at the doorway of Bethesda House, the Reverend Jenkins recites to Llaregid Hill his sunset poem.
Every morning when I wake, dear Lord, a little prayer I make. Oh, please to keep thy lovely eye on all poor creatures born to die. And every evening at sundown, I ask a blessing on the town. For whether we last the night or no, I'm sure is always touch and go. We are not holy, bad or good, who live our lives under milkwood. And thou, I know, will be the first to see our best side, not our worst. Oh, let us see another day. Bless us this holy night, I pray. And to the sun we all will bow and say goodbye, but just for now.
Dusk is drowned forever until tomorrow. It is all at once night now. The windy town is a hill of windows, and from the lapped waves the lights of the lamps in the windows call back the day and the dead that have run away to sea. All over the calling dark, babies and old men are bribed and lullabied to sleep.
Hush-a-bye, baby, the Sandman is coming. Rock-a-bye, grandpa, in the treetop. When the wind blows, the cradle will rock. When the bough breaks, the cradle will fall. Come, Grandpa, whiskers and all.
Blind Captain Cat climbs into his bunk. Like a cat, he sees in the dark. Through the voyages of his tears, he sails to see the dead.
Dancing Williams,
Still dancing.
Jonah Jarvis,
Still.
Curly Bevan Skull,
Rosie with God, she has forgotten dying.
The thin night darkens. The breeze from the creased water sighs the streets close under milk-waking wood. The wood, whose every tree foot's cloven in the black glad sight of the hunters of lovers, that is a God-built garden to Mary Ann sailors who knows there is heaven on earth and the chosen people of his kind fire in Clarigibb's land. That is the fair day farmhands wantoning ignorant chapel of bridesbeds, and to the Reverend Eli Jenkins a green-leaved sermon on the innocence of men. The suddenly wind-shaken wood springs awake for the second dark time, this one spring day.
Absolutely delightful. Thank you both for your work.
Cerys was talking about not missing the humour or losing the humour in Dylan. That certainly was full of the humour.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And all the dark bits as well. I mean, there's so many dead people in there. But yeah, thank you so much. Thank you everybody for sharing in this. It's been quite special to share different interpretations of that one work on the day that it was first performed in public in New York 70 years ago, and in the name of the house where the man himself was born. So thank you, and thank you too very much for being with us this evening. We really appreciate the time and your input. And yeah, thank you.